so let me now begin by sharing with you two things. First of all, I'll share with you the beginning of my blog for this week, which I'm calling Choosing Life Over Death. And I will relate it. I haven't done it yet in my blog, but I will be relating it to today's class. So this week has been a hard week for us all in Israel. It doesn't matter what side you're on. We're all in pain. We're all waiting. The press is having a field day playing on our emotions. There's no end to the suffering we're all being exposed to. The hospitals are in waiting for the unknown. Are the released hostages, if they are released, going to be curable mentally and physically? It's all guesswork. And how many bodies will there be? Who are the chosen few who will be released? In contrast to Moses' demand that all the people be let go at once and the 10 plagues to assure that no one will be left behind, our government seems to be unable to make a deal that's lasting. If the deal goes through, it will be in dribs and drabs, and for the families, it's excruciating. And no one trusts our government, and no one trusts the Hamas to go through with the deal. There will be no winners. I have made an attempt not to listen to the news because there's enough uncertainty in life. In addition, my son has just gone back to the Los Angeles area where he wrote me last night that they cut off electricity for a while because of the danger of I think they're called Santa Ana winds. So we also have the arbitrariness of nature as well as the arbitrary whims of the murderous Hamas. And we should not forget that in Israel, there are quite a few people who do not want the exchange of prisoners for hostages to take place and for the war to end. And that it's not only the Smotriches and Ben-Gvirs in our country, it includes families of the hostages and parents of fallen soldiers. And so I called my blog Choosing Life Over Death, and I will be relating it to today's class. And so let me just stop the share and share with you a prayer which was written and then translated into English by my son. Do I have it here? I think so. Yeah, I put it in. Wait, no, I haven't shared it with you yet, have I? No. Share. Here we go. So I actually took out the picture that I had in here and replaced it with this prayer, which is called Prayer Upon the Release of Hostages. May it be your will, may it be your will. May it be your will that you will send blessing and success to the efforts of our emissaries. Somebody has a lot of noise there. Whoever's making that noise, mute yourselves. And bring back in peace all of our hostages, captives, and abductees, infants and children, the elderly, young men and women. May you guide their paths homeward to their land, to their homes, to healing and restoration, and may you help them return to their full strength. Bring back all the bodies of those who have been abducted to eternal rest in the land of Israel, and grant some closure for their mourning loved ones. Guard us from conflicts and disputes within, and unite our hearts in truth through diverse perspectives, values, and differences with mutual respect. For what we share is far greater than what divides and separates us. Silence the voices of critics and those who belittle, both from within and from outside. Return our soldiers to their homes in peace, healthy in body and spirit. May your presence dwell among us, and may you bring peace upon us and our surroundings now and forevermore. So this was written by Ayelet Cohen-Weeder, and it was adapted from the Hebrew by Rabbi Tzvi Gretz, my son, who also made a few changes which were not in there. So I just checked with him because I wanted to have the correct attribution. I still would like to, I have the Hebrew and English. I have the Hebrew if anyone wants it. So today's topic is going to be about Yocheved, and we're going to be looking, the reason I started with this is because my association that I'm also going to be writing in my blog is Choosing Life Over Death. And what's very interesting, when you look at the beginning of Exodus, and you have so many women there, and the women are all almost conspiring to have life, as opposed in opposition to Pharaoh, who is clearly a death force. What I found very interesting in something which I'm calling Yocheved, and looking at modern Midrashim of Yocheved, that she is not mentioned at all in the story. In other words, if I were to ask you, okay, what do you know about Yocheved? Well, you'll tell me, okay, she's the woman who conceived a son, and she hid him, and right, and she put him in a basket, and she put the child in the basket, right, and then that's Yocheved. But it doesn't say that here. If you notice, it says a certain member of the house of Levi went and took into his household as his wife a woman of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, okay? And then afterwards it says, and she put the child into the basket, and his sister, no mention that this is Miriam, his sister stationed herself at a distance, right? And then it says the daughter of Pharaoh came down. She heard that it was a boy crying. And then she said, this must be a Hebrew child. Presumably she opened up the basket and saw that he was circumcised. Otherwise, how would she know that it's a Hebrew child? Or else she knew that her father was saying, throw them into the Nile. That's another possibility. Again, then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, no mention of name, a Hebrew nurse, right? And then she gets the child's mother. Again, no mention whatsoever of Yocheved by name. And so the woman took the child and nursed it. No mention of Moses here either, right? In other words, we have a story with nobody's name. The only one who is mentioned here, perhaps, is the daughter of Pharaoh and a certain member of the house of Levi, but we don't know who, right? In chapter 6, we will find out that there are 3 sons of Levi, Gershon, Kahat, and Merari, right? And the Gershon sons and Kohat's sons. And then we find out that he had a son whose name was Amram, right? And then we find out that Amram took into his household as wife his father's sister, Yocheved. Notice the relationship. And she bore him Aaron and Moses. Hello, who's missing? Okay. Where's Miriam? There is no mention of Miriam until we get to chapter 15. And this is when you have the Song of the Sea, when all of a sudden Miriam shows up. And how does she show up? Then Miriam, the prophet, she's a prophet. Where does she show up as being a prophet, right? And Aaron's sister. What about Moses? Right, so in the book of Exodus, we don't feel any connection with Miriam and Moses, right? She's Aaron's sister. So of course, we now can go back and say, oh, of course, the sister was Miriam, the child was Moses, right? And the Hebrew nurse was, the mother was Yocheved. But we don't get that information in chapter 2, which is fascinating. So of course, this leads to all sorts of midrashim that everyone can look at, which is wonderful. And we'll see that when the Bible barely mentions Yocheved, but in the rabbinic midrash, we do find that the father is very distinguished. And here and there, we find some connections with Miriam as well. So, by the way, in chapter 26 of the book of Numbers, that's quite a while from now, we will find out that Amram's wife was Yocheved, a daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Egypt. So she really is, she is related, right? She is definitely, she's definitely his father's sister, Yocheved. So Yocheved is what in relationship to Aaron and Moses? She's an aunt, right? Yocheved is both auntie to Moses as well as mommy, which is very interesting, right?
But is that allowed? Is that a relationship that's allowed?
We're not talking about what's allowed right now.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I just think it's interesting. And
Oh,
now, chapter
okay.
26, in chapter 76, we have she bore to Amram. This is
Mm.
Numbers. This is not the book of Exodus. She bore to Amram, Aaron, and Moses, and their sister Miriam. All right. And then we find out who else. Okay. By the way, it's interesting that Aaron has sons, but how come there's no mention of Moses' sons here? It's also interesting in the Talmud when we're talking about Yocheved. All right. Wait a minute. How is this possible? Remember, she's a daughter of Levi. How is this possible? She was 130 years old,
Oh
and he
boy.
called her a daughter.
Yeah.
Okay, so this refers, they have to explain this. This refers to Yocheved, whose conception occurred during the journey to Egypt, right?
Oh.
Right? As it was said, who was born to Levi in Egypt. Her birth occurred in Egypt, but her conception did not occur there. Okay. Um, and again, she had already been pregnant 3 months, right? And Rabbi Judah says that Rabbi Zabina said it compares the bearing of the child to its conception. As the conception was painless, so was the bearing painless. Hence, it is learned that right now, isn't this wonderful? Righteous women are not included in the decree upon Eve. So if all of us who have experienced pain at birth, we're not righteous, right? None of us are righteous women because we've all experienced pain in birth. But Yocheved did not, she did not experience any pain. Anyway, I say this with tongue in cheek, but the very famous Midrash that some of you probably do know is in connection with Miriam, and this is that that there went a man of the house of Levi. Where did he go? It says there went. What does it mean that he went? So Rabbi Judah, the son of Sabina, said he went in the counsel of his daughter. Atana taught Amram was the greatest man of his generation. When he saw that the wicked Pharaoh had decreed, every son that's born you shall cast into the river, he said, in vain do we labor. He arose and divorced his wife. All the Israelites thereupon arose and divorced their wives. Why did they divorce their wives? So that they wouldn't have any children, right? If you don't, of course, if you're not married, you can't have any sex, right? So if they divorce their wives, there won't be any children, right? And this is really very interesting. So this is actually, and I plan to use this in my blog because I'm talking about Thanatos and Eros, right? Freud's distinguishment, those who choose death and those who choose the life force, right? So they are choosing death, basically, right? Not to have any more children. They're following in the footsteps of the wicked Pharaoh, right? His daughter, who's his daughter? But notice there's no mention here of it being Miriam. His daughter said to him, Father, thy decree is more severe than Pharaoh's, because Pharaoh decreed only against the males, whereas thou hast against the and females. Pharaoh,
Can I call you in an hour?
I'm muting. Okay. Pharaoh only decreed concerning this world, whereas you have decreed concerning this world and the world to come. In the case of the wicked Pharaoh, there is a doubt whether his decree will be fulfilled or not. Whereas in your case, though you are righteous, it is certain that thy decree will be fulfilled. As it is said, thou shalt also decree a thing, and it shall be established unto thee. And after hearing this long speech by his daughter, his nameless daughter, he arose and took his wife back. In other words, Miriam is a life force. She's a force of Eros, saying to her, reproving her father for the divorce. And after listening to her, he took his wife back. And not only because he was a leader, not only did he take his wife back, but they all arose and took their wives back and then proceeded to have more children, of course. So this is really very interesting. So we have here one sign of her being the life of Miriam being a life force. All right. Let's see. Here we have something very interesting in Levi Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews. And Barbara, would you like to read this?
Yes, thank you. Legends of the Jews. Among mortals, it was particularly Yocheved, Moses' mother, and Joshua, his disciple, that deeply mourned Moses' death. They were not indeed certain if Moses were dead, hence they sought him everywhere. Yocheved first went to Egypt and said to that land, Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim, hast thou perchance seen Moses? But Mitzrayim replied, as truly as thou livest, Yocheved, I have not seen him since the day when he slew all the firstborn here. Yocheved then betook herself to the Nile, saying, Nile, Nile, hast thou perchance seen Moses? But Nile replied, as truly as thou livest, Yocheved, I have not seen Moses since the day when he turned my water to blood. Then Yocheved went to the sea and said, See, hast thou perchance seen Moses? The sea replied, as truly as thou livest, Yocheved, I have not seen him since the day when he led the 12 tribes through me. Yocheved thereupon went to the desert and said, Desert, hast thou perchance seen Moses? The desert replied, as truly as thou livest, Yocheved, I have not seen him since the day whereupon he caused manna to rain down upon me. Then Yocheved went to Sinai and said, Sinai, hast thou perchance seen Moses? Sinai said, as truly as thou livest, Yocheved, I have not seen him since the day whereupon he descended from me with the 2 tablets of the law. Yocheved finally went to the rock and said, Rock, hast thou perchance seen Moses? The rock replied, as truly as thou livest, I have not seen him since the day when with his staff he twice smote me.
This is really an amazing midrash. The question is, what's the purpose of a midrash like this? It shows Yocheved's persistence, and also what's also very interesting.
Yocheved lived after Moses.
Yeah. So in other words, she's still alive. For some reason, they have his mother who brought him into the world, and Joshua, who will follow him, right? Who are the mourning, and they're searching all over. And there's a sense that they are really caring, right? But he's disappeared, and everyone is giving reasons why perhaps he should be dead, right? In other words, Egypt is sort of saying, well, Moses was not such a nice guy, right? He caused all these troubles to all sorts of people. It's interesting. It's a very interesting. Now, Levi Ginsburg in the Legends of Jews compiles lots of midrashim and puts them together. So we probably would have to unpack this and find the original one and see what the context is. But I just brought this here as a curiosity more than to discuss it. And then you have here in the Zohar, you have Yocheved, who comes in, and she's the mother of Moses, right? And she comes in with lots and lots of women, right? And there's no announcement. There's no da-dum, da-dum, right? There's no heralding her. But she comes in 3 times each day, and she praises the ruler of the world, God, and together they sing the song of the sea every day, and she herself recites, right? Right now, by the way, we do recite the song of the day every day, or the song of the sea every day. Shirat Hayam is recited in the services every day. And so she recites this, and she recites from, and Miriam the prophet, right? Not from Az Yoshir Moshe, Moses sings, but she recites from Miriam the prophet, right? And all these righteous women there in Gan Eden, here she is dead, listen to her pleasant voice, and so many holy angels acknowledge and praise the holy name with her. So this is really a very sweet little, I call it Yocheved's reward, that appears in the Zohar. Okay, so much for that. Before we go on, does anyone want to make any comments or have something to say before? Let me stop sharing for a minute Would somebody like to say something, add something, comment?
If I may just say that one of the things I thought while I was reading was this is a nice summation of all the important things that Moses did. So I wasn't looking at it maybe in the right way, but
Right.
it's a summation that works.
Yeah. Okay. That.
But it is a
and-
little funny that Moses is given the credit for killing the firstborn. He didn't kill the firstborns, God did. So
Right.
that there's a little bit of a play here.
Okay. And what about the mother? The mother, right? The mother is the vehicle here is the mother. So perhaps this is through her eyes, even though Egypt says this, right? Maybe Egypt is saying all of this. And from Egypt's perspective, they don't necessarily believe in God, right? So from Egypt's perspective, it is Moses who's doing it, right? Which is interesting, because when when you begin the book of Shemot, it starts out that and a new Pharaoh came in who did not know Joseph, right? This new Pharaoh is going to end up knowing Moses, but he did not know Joseph. So it's interesting, depending on perspective. But the fact that they're using Yocheved as the vehicle in the Midrash is what's fascinating. Somebody who's totally unknown in the Bible and who they don't bother to give her a name in the opening chapter.
It could be that they chose her because it's a mystery around Moses' death and where he's buried. So if even his mother doesn't know, how can we expect anybody else to know?
Nice, very nice, very nice. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on. Let's go back, and now we'll look at some modern midrash. Share screen. Okay, so I actually have two midrashim today. I don't know if we'll have time for both of them. One is a little bit shorter. One is Penina Edelman's Yocheved, which she's both the editor of Praise Her Works. I've used her works many times. She takes the verse always from Eshet Chayil, and here she chose to take the verse from Zamama Sadeva Tikacheu Mipri Kapeha Nata Karem. She sets her mind on an estate and acquires it. She plants a vineyard by her own labors. And so she decided to choose that as her particular verse. And the Midrash Hagadol, which is the structure for the whole book, every verse which relates to a verse in Eshet Chayil, the woman of valor, every verse is discussed by Midrash Hagadol. So here, Midrash Hagadol is relating the estate to Yocheved, all right, because of whom Israel was called vineyard of the Holy Land, all right. But the vineyard of the Lord of Hosts is the house of Israel. And why was she called Yocheved? Because her face was like Ziv HaKavod, Yocheved. In Hebrew, Ziv HaKavod. So you can see the word Yocheved you can see here in the Cheved, the Kavod, right? So it's a little bit of a stretch, right? Anyway, she points out that Yocheved spends the first part of her life as a free person, but by the time she marries Amram, she's a slave, and her two children, Aaron and Miriam, are born into slavery. And then she has some of her commentary here, where she basically says that Yocheved's not mentioned by name till much later, and then she asks the question, why does the story take so long to name her? And she points out that there's lots of women, and we know that, who are not named in the Bible. Noah's wife, the Shunammite woman, the widow from Saraphat, and wife of Obadiah. We know that eventually she is named. So unlike these other women who never get a name, at least she's getting a name. And so she becomes part of the mystery surrounding the Hebrew midwives, right? And so actually the midwives are mentioned, right? Shifra and Puah are mentioned. We didn't read that, but in chapter 1, verse 15, they are mentioned, all right? And they refused to kill the babies. They're examples, again, of eros as opposed to thanatos. And if not for them, there would be no Jewish people today. But of course, the Midrash is never happy to have women mentioned at all. So instead of giving full credit to Shifra, they decided to identify her as Yocheved, to taking away from Shifra. And they have a whole bunch of reasons how they do that. And Puah is identified as Miriam, or in some cases as Elisheva. All right. The names are given there. The question is, she asks a very interesting question. Were Yocheved and Miriam not identified because they had the secret work as midwives? That's a very, very interesting suggestion. You can think about that, So on the other hand, they are two women who are mentioned, right? And it's not clear if they are Egyptians, right? Or they are the midwives of, right? If they're the midwives of Egyptians, it's not clear from the text if they themselves are midwives. Okay, so we now come to Yocheved speaking, and let's see how many people do we need for this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We need five readers. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Sue, 1, Norman, 2, Lisa. No, Lisa, you don't like to read. 1 minute. Roberta, wait, what are you up to? Louise? I forgot what number I am. 4?
3. You're up to 3.
All right, so Louise, you're 3. Roberta, you're 4. And Toby, 5. Okay, and we'll need some more readers afterwards as well. So let's go back to the beginning. Here, Yocheved speaks.
Okay. Yocheved speaks. There I was, washing his clothes in the Nile, the sun cooking me as the day burned on. Miriam came to see what I was doing. She usually awoke before dawn, like me. That's when we talked and told each other our dreams. We would try to figure them out together. I had a dream of forebodings several nights in a row. A strange man knocked on our door. I answered it because Amram was not there. I suppose he was at the construction site. What do you want? I demanded, thinking he was probably one of the taskmasters giving us the usual bad news about the diminished food supply or increased workload. Although how the workload could be increased any further was beyond me. We were already up to 18 hours straight. With a snarl, he announced, "We will no longer be needing your services." But, I tried to get the words out, but my tongue was a heavy stone. I couldn't move. I was thinking frantically, who will help all the babies be born? That's right, we will no longer be needing you, he repeated, his voice supremely self-confident. He turned his back on me and vanished. I asked Miriam what she made of my dream.
Without hesitating, she said, Ima, your destiny is to bring into being the leader who is going to show us how to emerge from our slave bodies into our new free bodies. A snake already knows how to shed its old skin, but this Redeemer will need to teach us. But I answered, Abba has already said he will not be the conveyor of new souls into this world as long as they will be born into Pharaoh's prison. Abba is wrong, she retorted. I see it as clearly as the clearest water. You are meant to give birth to the leader of our people. She was right. I too had the gift of deep seeing from God, as did our mothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah before me. But it was difficult for me to put what I saw into words. Miriam had no problem speaking her visions whatsoever. I envied her at times. but it was not my way. Neither had it been my mother's way. Now you'll understand why what happened next stunned me so that my entire being was trembling.
I was getting ready for bed. Checking on Miriam and Aaron when they were fast asleep was one of my only pleasures. As I was getting ready to lie down next to Amram, he said in an unfamiliar tone, "I must talk to you." I sat next to him on the pallet and waited for him to speak. I placed my hand on his. He slid it out from under mine. Dread, cold and clammy, started spreading from my gut and filled my heart, throat, and shoulders. He did not look at me. He did not say my name as he told me. "I am leaving you. I can't bear to bring one more child into this." He held up both hands, revealing the utter emptiness of this. "Don't ask me to stay. I am no longer a man. I'm a slave without a soul. I'm a dried husk, not a husband or a father. I see every baby you bring into the world becoming another brick in Pharaoh's enormous edifices of death. I can't bear it any longer. I must go."
I broke that point. What he said was true. Our lives meant nothing. If he were an empty husk, I was a hollow womb of no use to anyone. Looking into my soul's depths, I saw future generations of women whose men would be driven to despair by what they had to endure as Jewish men. I saw generations of Jewish men and women driven to despair by the cruelty of their oppressors. I also saw some who managed to hope. I remembered our wedding when Amram and I stood together before our families and God. I could feel the vibrant currents of our ancestors coursing through us, intersecting with each other, cross-fertilizing, winding our destinies together. How could we split apart?
This is really an amazing ending if you think about it, okay? But it goes on.
Of course, you know how it all turned out. How my brave little Miriam stood up to her father and shamed him into realizing that he had become crueler than Pharaoh. I never pleaded with him to come back. I knew he would. Moses had to be born. I would nurse him so he'd have enough for me to thrive like a tough little vine in Pharaoh's house for the rest of his growing up years. I was patient with Amram as I was patient with God. I knew God did not ultimately control Pharaoh's heart. I knew God was watching us, waiting for us to rise up so we could learn Torah at Mount Sinai. But that's another story. I was blessed to be married twice to the same man, and yet my first and second marriages were completely different. Remarried, Amram and I were leagues apart from that young bride and groom who so innocently faced the beginning of their lives together. You didn't ask for number 6.
Okay, whoever just talked, you read that.
Toby, with all my knowing what was supposed to happen, that my Moses would lead us out of Egypt, I was never absolutely sure. What if my inner sight was not showing me the truth? What if this seeing was not a gift from God, but a curse from Satan? I only knew for certain I had been right when I was blessed to be standing there at the mountain while my youngest child and God spoke to each other. And I was blessed to be alive when we entered the promised land. I had trusted what I knew to be true. The children I brought into this world were the grapes in God's vineyard. This is my message to you. Trust what you know to be true. Listen to what your heart tells you. Act on it.
The last line is a little soppy, but this is actually meant, this is supposed to be a wonderful gift to give for bar mitzvah girls as well. So it's some of them. On the other hand, the first part was tremendous, really moving. And if you think about the fact that how it ended, right, where the future generations of women whose men would be driven to despair. I mean, really, it's an amazing ending because that's how she ends. She ended her. Yocheved speaks this way with the question, and the solution comes afterwards. But it was written clearly with a moment of despair, and also, of course, she's basing it on some of the midrashim that we looked at. And then she has. I usually don't put these things in as well. But she also has here for further thought. Marcia, would you read for further thought? Oh, wait, I muted you. You have to unmute. I muted you before. You were making
Right.
noise.
All right. How do you think it felt for Yocheved to be the mother of 3 such strong and talented children, Miriam, Aaron, and Moses, especially as they were growing up? When we look at all our responsibilities, many of us feel trapped, a bit enslaved by some aspect of our lives. How can dreaming of change help us move toward regaining a measure of the simplicity and freedom we knew as children in childhood? If you were talking to Yocheved about your dreams, how might her attitudes and her experiences going from freedom into slavery be useful to you?
Okay, this is really, she's actually asking some interesting questions here, right? So in other words, I took it upon myself to answer some of these questions in the Midrash that I wrote, which I don't think we'll get to read all of it, but certainly we could read parts of it. And then she just simply goes on to write here that, she's difficult to locate, right? Ellen Frankel, in her book, 5 Books of Miriam, has a, the poignant rabbinic midrash on Yocheved's grief at the death of Moses, which I believe is what I had here at the beginning. And Aviva Zornberg has an interesting commentary about the midwives in general in her book called The Particulars of Rapture. Those of you who were in my class on, what day was it? Whenever it was, I couldn't find the book, but now I did find the book. And on page 22, let's just see if it's relevant. I didn't have time to look at it. No, I don't think it's actually relevant, so I'm not going to read it. Okay. I'm looking at the wrong book. It's called The Particulars of Rapture, and I'm looking at the Murmuring Deep. Wrong book, sorry. Okay, I did not find the book after all. Okay, so I wrote a midrash, and I've taught this to you in the past. I know some of you are here for the first time, but the very last midrash that I wrote was about Yocheved, and I was inspired. I was at a conference in 1999. Most of the midrashim that I wrote were in the 80s, but in 1999 I was at a conference, and of all places, Valdosta, Georgia, which is very deep south. Everyone was calling me ma'am. Everyone was very, very polite there, and Valdosta is known for their onions, if I'm not mistaken. It's supposed to be a special onion. Anyway, I was an invited speaker, and treated with respect and invited to all of the special people who were there. And one of the people who was there was Kate Millett. And those of you who know about early feminism, the name will probably be very, very familiar to you. And when I met her, she was 65 years old, and this is more or less what she looked like. And while I was resting I had my laptop with me, of course. I never went any place without my laptop. And while I was resting, I had this sudden vision of Yocheved and Kate Millett, and decided to write a midrash, my very, very last midrash, which also appeared both in the shorter version in a book called All the Women Followed Her, and also in my own book of Midrashim, which is the longer and final version. I'm not sure which one I have here, but it does start out with a certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman, and the description, right? The description of her is really a description straight out of what Kate looks like. All right. And so she's having, her time, she's drinking water. I'll skip it a little bit because it's very long, and I'll come to read it. And she's thinking about her whole family. She's thinking about Elisheva. She's thinking about Zipporah. She's thinking about Miriam. She's thinking about what kind of a family is this? It's a long trip. She hopes she survives, right? And then this is the description. Yocheved here. Let me just go back to show you the picture of, okay? All right. And this is the description. Yocheved is a woman with a long white mane of hair flowing in all directions. I really was inspired by her. Her eyesight is still pretty sharp for a woman of her indeterminable age. Now at the age of 80, 65 is pretty young, but at the time when I was writing this, I thought that 65 was old. And she says to herself, oh, I could tell you guys some stories if I were inclined. And she says, that would certainly change Moses's and Aaron's claims to the authority of the books they are constantly scribbling, insisting that they are Yahweh-inspired words. Too bad she does not know how to write, though she might use one of Elisheva's scribes to jot down her reminiscences so that her story, right, as opposed to history, her story doesn't get lost, drowned out by Moses and Aaron's version of truth. And then it continues. So let me find, how many readers do I need? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 11. Let's start with 11. So where am I starting from? I'm starting from here. Okay, so let me just see who we have here. At the risk of asking you to repeat a second time, so Janet, 1, Susan, 2, Geraldine, 3, Barbara, 4. I know you read already. Sue, 5, Louise, 6, Marcia, 7, Toby, 8, Norman, 9, Joyce, 10. I think that was enough. Okay. Hopefully we'll have enough time for all of it. Okay.
Which of her daughters would she write about? Would it be her favorite, the impetuous Miriam, who could have been the leader of the people had she not been a woman? As it is, the people come to her and look up to her, and all her time is taken up listening to their complaints, serving as advisor and problem solver to her brothers. The three of them are engaged in a power struggle. Some days Miriam and Aaron ally themselves against Moses. Some days it is Moses and Miriam against Aaron. And sometimes Miriam stands alone against both of them. She worries about Miriam. She's too outspoken. Moses is clearly the reluctant leader of people, chosen by Yahweh and preferred over Miriam. She is resentful of her little brother's chosenness. After all, it was she who saved him, watched over him in the bulrushes before Bitya, Pharaoh's daughter, found him. She was the one who kept in touch over all those long years and brought Yocheved in openly at great risk to herself to nurse her son, who was an illegal alien and doomed to die by Pharaoh's decrees.
Miriam keeps on going to Moses and telling him that he better find some time for Zipporah, that things cannot keep on the way they are. She hints that she knows something about him and Elisheva and is threatening to go to the meeting tent and confront him in the face of God and get him to change his ways. Miriam was playing with fire. She had let her power get to her head and has no real sense of a woman's place. I could never educate her, not since she became everyone's darling for her prophetic powers. She actually saved our people and was given credit for it. She went to Amram and challenged him to procreate when all the other men were afraid to have intercourse with their wives after Pharaoh's decrees to throw all the little baby boys into the Nile to annihilate us. Amram bragged about that while laying bricks, and other men emulated him. That act of boldness, magnified and retold as one of the legends which saved us from dying out, and which also provided us with our Moses, Prince of Egypt, made her reputation.
She was her women's groups around her. She has her women's groups around her. She has her phenomenal insight into finding water for us when we are thirsty. Is it instinct or is it Yahweh's gift of power to her to compensate her for not choosing her to lead the people to the promised land? Actually, I never understood why it was Moses who was chosen, not Aaron or Miriam. The first time he was away from anyone's restraining influence, actually from the influence of women, now that I think about it, he went and lost his temper and killed an Egyptian in typical Levite fashion. Why? Because when he witnessed the labors of his relative and saw an Egyptian beating one of his kinsmen, he turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand in true cowardly fashion. What could you expect of someone who is just a young, spoiled man who has grown up in the palace among women? Our people reacted in typical fashion. Rather than be grateful, one of them said, "Who made you chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?"
At this point, Moses was frightened of the consequences of the deed, not the wrongness of it, but that he might get caught. Sure enough, when Pharaoh learned of the matter, he sought to kill him, but Moses had already run away. He arrived in the land of Midian and sat down beside a well, and the rest we know, it's history. He went and got married to you know who, no real good judgment, just because of that Levite's quick temper, which he loses so easily, hitting the rocks to get water instead of speaking soothingly and listening to the water flowing beneath the stones, like Miriam.
They thought her daughter had magical powers. To this day, they sing this song whenever they look for water. She composed it just as she composed the song of praise to God for successfully crossing the Sea of Reeds. She loved to sing, and she taught all her songs to the women, and the men learned these songs from their wives and mothers. Spring up, O well, sing to it, the well which the chieftains dug, which the nobles of the people started with maces with their own staffs. Miriam was a special child. She was born after Aaron, but she always acted the big sister and collected the other children around her the way a stone does moss, and then they always stayed faithful to her. She had this charm, this power, this talent. She never wanted to be married like the other children. She wanted to do things. Worse than that, she wanted to run the world, or if not that, to tell others how to run the world. That's the source of her conflict with Moses, her willfulness. If only they could cooperate. If only she could stop seeing herself as the big sister. She even bossed us around and told us what to do. I remember so well.
And that's why they call her a prophet, although no one usually acknowledges that about her, except Yahweh when it suits him. There is too much built-in discrimination. There is too much built-in discrimination against women in our laws. Miriam is so frustrated about that. First, how it affects her, and second, and how unfair it is. She rails against injustice. She hasn't learned to moderate her tone. She will be punished for this, cast out. My husband, Amram, gave up on her a long time ago. He said, "What harm can her willfulness do? She'll outgrow it. Let her enjoy herself while she can." So he encouraged her. I think he doesn't perceive how serious a problem it is. Aaron does, but he doesn't know what to do. And when he can, he uses her disdain for injustice, so that both are temporarily allied against Moses. And then when his schemes don't work, Miriam gets the blame.
Mrs.
It was
Romer,
I think it's me, right?
I thought I went after Louise. It doesn't matter. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. You can go. It's all right.
Go ahead, Marcia.
It was rumored that this god would reveal its presence to one of Yocheved's 3 children, but no one knew which of the 3 it would be. No one thought that it would be Moses, since he was being raised as an Egyptian. But it was Miriam's job to see to it that he would be nourished on the Israelite traditions, just in case. Miriam, of course, hoped it would be her and strutted around the community as if she were the chosen, bossing Aaron around, who didn't strike anyone as a leader in those days. Everyone knew that Aaron wouldn't be chosen, but could Miriam, a girl, be Yahweh's choice? She certainly thought so, and she had her followers, those who augmented the stories which attributed to her supernatural skills.
Miriam came over to the sukkah. She saw Yocheved lying down in a reverie. She was alarmed. Yocheved, are you all right? She asked. Can I bring you anything? Yocheved's white mane was strewn all over the place. She was still in a prone position, having fallen asleep while in thought. She looked to Miriam like a stranger, her eyes so intensely focused on her. Yocheved looked at her hard and long, clearly deep in thought. Yes, my dear, there is something you can do for me. You have access to scribes. You know how to organize, how to write. I want to write a testament. I want to put my memories into some form of history that will parallel, not supplant, what Moses and Aaron are doing. I fear that they are not including women's voices in their stories and retellings of our history.
Yocheved wanted so much to record the inside story of women in the menstrual compound. This was Tzipporah's contribution. She had organized it. She deserved credit for it. As an outsider, she had questioned the loneliness that Israelite women feel every month and thought that if they could all be together like she and her 6 sisters were, the women would look forward to this time period rather than be outcasts. Thus began the tradition of Rosh Chodesh, the celebration of the new moon by women, who all seemed to menstruate around the same time. It became a holiday, an expression of womanliness rather than a punishment. I want to attack the Levites' view of the menstruant women as unclean. How dare they take our tradition away from us, Yocheved thought indignantly.
Another story that must be told is our friendship with the Egyptian women who sent us on our way with presents so we would not go away empty-handed. Each woman gave us from their house a gift to remember her by, usually a goddess made of silver or gold, or a simple piece of jewelry or clothing for our sons and daughters that their children had outgrown, since they knew we would need it for the long trip. For some reason, rather than see it as an act of generosity and compassion by our friends, it was recorded by our scribes as an act of trickery. It was said that we borrowed these items, implying that we stole them in lieu of the back pay owed us. The men never realized that we had good friends and allies among the Egyptian women, a relationship that goes back in time all the way to Sarah's friendship with Hagar. Before that went sour. I'll read. And what of our contribution to the Exodus itself? Who was it who stayed up all night preparing and baking unleavened cakes of the dough, which we took out of Egypt? True, we were driven out of Egypt and could not delay, but not by the women. Our Egyptian friends were there helping us to bake, crying tearfully with us about how much they would miss us. Even Princess Bitya came over, sneaking away from her entourage to say a special goodbye to Moses. She knew we had no time to prepare any provisions for herself, so she brought us some special goodies. This would be Yocheved's contribution, her way of making history. Miriam, too, was part of history, though not always mentioned by name. I will preserve the other side, the softer side, and then I will no longer be considered just a mother, a daughter. This will set the record straight. Now I can get a good night's sleep. In the morning, there will be more to think about.
I'll continue. Miriam went back to her duties. It seemed there was no end to the people who came to her for treatment. She was elated at the prospect of getting a chance to record her mother's memoirs. This would be her contribution, her way of making history, of seeing that she would be mentioned by name as part of history. So often, I don't get credit, only hints. I don't only want to be known as a sister, I want to be known as me. That night, Yocheved died. Miriam did go down in history, but usually unnamed, hinted at, tantalizing questions remained. Why did Moses hit the rock after Miriam's death? Was it that he did not know the secrets that Miriam had of coaxing out the water? We can only guess. So this was a story that I wrote a long time ago, inspired really by Kate Millett. She was really a formidable woman. And even though this was 99, that's how many years ago? 25 years ago, my gosh. More. 26 years. It was March. I was on a book tour then for my.
Is that when you came?
In 19, I was on a book tour for my wife beating book, and I had been invited to speak first at Emory College. David Blumenthal, also from Vermont, invited me to come to Emory College, and I had a lovely, lovely time there. And then afterwards, this conference was at the same time. So, that was a wonderful coincidence for me. But going from, Atlanta, Georgia to Valdosta, it's like, have any of you ever been in Valdosta? Anyway, it's like what people would say about Omer in relationship to Tel Aviv, where I live. So,
I lived in Atlanta for 30 years. I found it pretty backwards, but whatever.
Not now.
Compared to Valdosta, it's.
But anyway, and it was such an amazing conference. I mean, and my keynote speech that I gave then, I managed to reuse it so many times, and it ended up being the introduction to my book on unlocking the garden. It ended up being, but I had to explain basic things because people, the students there really didn't know anything, and it was. I think that I may have been. There were not too many Jews who came to this conference, so it was like also was very weird, and
it's important when you can express something about that we don't have the horns, and
right. It was very important for me. And by the way, one of my talk was actually on Shabbat, and I had to make a decision, in terms of microphone, not microphones and whatever. In the end, I said, I'll go with it. But
it was on. It was on anyway. You didn't turn it on.
Today I don't take that very seriously. Yeah. But I really had to explain certain things. And one of the things I actually said was that to me, the Hebrew Bible is what when you say the Bible, right? I say the Bible, right? And I don't think twice about saying it, but I will never say the Old Testament.
Mhm.
And now the politically correct thing to say is the Hebrew Bible
Right.
at conferences where there are both Jews and no one says the Old Testament or the New Testament anymore. Sometimes I'll say the New Testament, but they don't know when it's really not, you know, politically correct to say the Old Testament. So I actually had to explain that, you know, to as a basic thing. So anyway, whatever. Anyway, this was in the. Well, by the way, this book is available. All of these things. If you look at my signature,
Online.
all of my books are available online. Yeah.
Good.
Okay. So anybody want to make any comments? We're over time, but there's those of you who have to leave will leave. Does anyone want to make any comments? Janet, and then Barbara, and then Susan.
It's a really lovely, lovely Midrash. And I'm a cognitive scientist and a learning scientist. So like just this fact that you got so many ideas from looking at Kate Millett, you know, and that her is such a strong woman, right? And you know, I often when I read something, I say, where'd they get that idea from? And often when I'm listening to, you know, somebody talk about their book, I'm disappointed that they can't tell me where they got their idea from. So I really love that.
Actually, I now that you remind me, I was actually on a sabbatical in Vancouver. So I went from that conference to Vancouver, where I was at UB, what is it, UBC, I think,
British.
and I continued writing the Midrash on the plane, and then I ran out of the battery. So I had to stop, but I completed most of it, you know, on the plane. Yeah, who was it? The second person?
It's me, and I'll be really short. I love your final line, which is how without being able to ask, we have to guess. And in guessing, I've done a lot of guessing about Moses striking the rock, because as a geologist, it's a legit way to get water out of a rock. Water's held in the pore spaces. Unless the pore spaces are connected, you can't get the water out. And then you get to the second time after after Miriam has passed away, and he strikes the rock. He's not told to strike the rock this time, but he strikes the rock and he doesn't get water. And you say, oh, and he gets punished for it. So why didn't he get water that time?
Oh, he does get water,
Well,
but
he gets water, but why was he punished
right away.
for it?
Right.
And so the geology still works. The water is held in the rock, but you have to guess why the difference.
Okay, that's a wonderful perspective. I never thought of that. Susan.
Yeah, I had one question in part of the reading was that, I don't remember, it was your Midrash or the first one where Yocheved raised Moses, but she really didn't raise Moses because wasn't he in the palace with the Egyptian people?
Well, the question is, how long did she wean you? How long do you wean children?
Okay, that wasn't my original thing I wanted to mention though, because I came on late. I apologize. I go to this gym program and I can't seem to get myself out of there fast enough.
I envy you.
What is the mood in Israel? How are things?
I actually began by reading the beginning of my blog. That's exactly how I began. So I hope to, you know, to take some of the ideas that we had today with, you know, of women being the nurturing force and whatever. I don't know how I'm going to connect it all, but
All right, I'll look forward to reading your blog then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so
we're all still praying here that it's going to work.
Right. With all this uncertainty, it's really, you know, Marcia, how are you, by the way? Tzvika wrote to me that they cut off his.
Oh well, he's in a war zone. We're very lucky. The winds were horrendous, and that's where we could have had a lot of damage. And last year I lost a tree because it fell. You know, these are old, beautiful trees, but I always wondered how those skinny palm, the roots, they're so skinny and they're high, and
Right.
some of them were lost this year. And that was very scary because then with the wind, the fire was somewhat contained. I mean, they're so excited. It's 8% I mean, my goodness, it's going to take a long time. But then the wind blew the embers to areas that were not near the water, not near. But yesterday's New York Times had an article about the Arnold Schoenberg. His family lost 4 houses and
Wow.
lost all the scores. I mean, they're digital copies, but they lost. They built this house to have it the music accessible to musicians all over the world, and all that is gone.
Yeah, I'm not a great Schoenberg fan. On the other hand,
No, but
it's terrible. No.
he did write some melodic pieces, and he also was a painter. No, he did. Yeah.
Right. But no, Speaker wrote to me that in Palos Las Verdes, they cut off the electricity there.
Yes, because they're afraid that, I mean, a lot of the electrical poles out there are above ground, and they're on wooden poles.
Okay. Okay, anyway, thank you for explaining why I haven't spoken to him yet. I did not quite understand why they cut off the electricity. Okay, let's hope next week will be a better week.
Yes, right.
Let's pray that something
I
finally
mean,
gets
it
moving.
looks
For
like
sure.
many areas look like war zones. They
Yeah.
really, now
Yeah.
you can understand.
Look at the comment I
Geraldine
wrote in the
and
chat.
Francine. Geraldine and then Francine.
I
Yeah.
just I'm gonna always plug for our first responders to keep them in your hearts because
Yes.
they are working their tails off
Yeah.
to try
Yes,
to get
really
this
are.
contained, and they do not get enough credit. I'm sorry. I don't care
Well,
about the name calling and all that other BS that's
but
going on.
they are getting from the ordinary people bringing.
Yeah, but I'm talking about in terms of
Oh,
Matt
yes.
stuff and some of the
Right,
crazy
yes,
people who are in our leadership. So just each individual, just continue to pray for their well-being and
Absolutely.
strength and
I mean,
courage to do that. Because I'm gonna tell you, give me a house fire any day over a wildfire.
oh,
Okay.
yeah.
It's horrible.
Francine, you wanted to say
Thank
something?
you.
Oh no, you just were waving. Okay.
Yeah.
It's hard to
Shabbat
tell.
shalom, everyone.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Naomi.
Naomi.
Shabbat shalom.
Take care.
Thank you, Naomi. Everybody be safe.
Stay safe.
Shalom.
Bye,
Yeah.
Shalom.